So it appears that the court in a 6-3 decision struck down President Trump's tariffs, those broad-based ones that have to do with IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The president put forward IEEPA tariffs on 2 accounts. One was those fentanyl-related tariffs related to Canada, Mexico, and in part on China, and then the other were the more broad-based ones where he cited persistent trade imbalances. Now, we're still going through this. Cases coming in real time right now to figure out the 2 questions that were in front of the court. One was, does President Trump actually have the authority to invoke IEEPA to impose tariffs? Because this has never been done before. This is typically a federal authority that is used to invoke sanctions. So the question here is whether or not he circumvented Congress. The other question was about whether or not he actually invoked IEEPA correctly, if he's able to, by declaring these national emergencies. Did those national emergencies related to fentanyl, related to these trade imbalances, reach a legal standard of what is known as an unusual and extraordinary threat, that the president would have this authority to impose a tariff, a regulation of commerce in this way to achieve his objectives. We're still reading through this, but it appears that we have one at least dissenting opinion was from Kavanaugh, of course, Brett Kavanaugh, who was nominated under President Trump, who says, quote, "The court says nothing today about whether, and if so, how the government should go about returning the billions of dollars that it has collected from importers, but that process is likely to be a mess, as was acknowledged at oral argument." So that's going to be the entire next phase of this.
It doesn't seem to matter to investors, at least for the moment. You look at the S&P 500, it did shoot up. It's come back a little bit, but what's notable here, Paul, is that the best performing group among 24 groups is the consumer durable and apparels group. Lululemon, for instance, jumping about 5% right at the open. It's paired some of that advance to 2.4%. Lululemon, along with other companies, presumably hurt by these tariffs, would benefit, therefore, with the removal of these tariffs, although, as Tyler made clear, it's not clear whether there would be a refund or how that would even be put together.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of reading some of the Bloomberg headlines. Supreme Court does not address eligibility for tariff refunds. And Bloomberg News also reporting that hundreds of tariff refund lawsuits pending in U.S. trade court. So, Tyler, this seems like that's where the rubber meets the road, to the extent that anybody's going to try to get a tariff relief or tariff refunds. It's not going to be easy, at least at this stage.
Well, if you want to hear a pretty startling statistic, IEEPA tariffs have been collected from more than 301,000 importers. Wow. And every company that wants a refund would need a distinct claim in court. Perhaps we'll likely see a class action lawsuit that could maybe put this a little bit more broad-based. But when we're looking at just the massive amount of revenue that was raised by these IEEPA tariffs alone, of course, the Trump administration has other tariff authorities that are already in place, Section 232 related to national security, for example. But those IEEPA broad-based tariffs brought in last year more than $134 billion for the U.S. government. So it's going to be a complicated process. It likely would leave the question of refunds to a lower court, most likely the Court of International Trade, which first took up this case. There's a few different wonky points that I had written down here on how this could ultimately end up happening. One thing to know is that there's something known as the liquidation process, which basically is the statute of limitation that a company can ask for its money back. That's 314 days. So some of those tariffs imposed on China have actually been imposed longer than that, so those companies want to get those back. But by and large, I think we're still within that time frame for these companies to ask for those requests.
And just a quick mention, equities building on their advance a little bit, with the S&P 500 now up 1/3%. Treasury yields are higher. And the thinking is, with the removal of tariffs, would leave a budget hole that we know already surpassed $130 billion as of December. Treasury would need to sell a lot more bonds to bridge the gap, and that would put some pressure on yields, upward pressure. And of course, if there are refunds as part of it, that would only make the situation worse. It would exacerbate these moves.
So I guess, Tyler, there's still opportunities. There's still tools that the president can use to apply some tariffs, even if this IEEPA sweeping one is no longer on the table.
Right. And we've already heard telegraphed from the administration that they're going to pull on these other federal authorities. Some of them are already in place. We talk a lot about Section 232, those national security tariffs that the administration has put forward on some of those critical sectors, steel, aluminum, critical minerals, and a lot of those other areas that have been a focus of the Trump administration when it comes to countering China. We could also see Section 301 investigations. That's over unfair trade practices. We saw a lot of those imposed on China under the first Trump administration. Think allegations of IP protection violations as one example. And then there's some lesser known ones, like Section 338 that hasn't been used since the 1940s. I also have Section 201 here, tariffs imposed on goods that cause injury to domestic industry. There's a lot, but basically the crux to think of this is that the Trump administration likes IEEPA because that's a lot more flexible, it's a lot more broad-based. A lot of these tariffs have limits. They'll have to go away after a certain amount of time, and the rates can't go that high. A lot of these tariffs have a 15% ceiling, for example, whereas we know the president in some cases has threatened tariffs, 50% and onwards.
And also, all the different sections that you cited, most of these tariffs can't be imposed instantly. There's a bit of waiting time, and we know the president wants to declare something and have it kind of be in effect almost immediately. And the IEEPA tariffs allowed him that flexibility, as you put it.
Exactly. A Section 232 investigation on average takes 9 months to complete.
Wow. Yeah.
We have seen this administration in some cases do this under a more expedited timeline because they actually pulled on investigations that were launched under the first Trump administration. So they were able to make the legal argument that they already had such a bolstering of information behind them that they could make the determination that this, meets the national security concerns or the unfair trade allegations to put on their tariffs. But to your point exactly, Scarlett, this definitely limits the flexibility of the administration.